comrades. It's that time again. Hello, this is the Liberation Hour every Wednesdays at 7 p.m. on WRFU 104.5 Radio Free Urbana. Hello, comrades. We're back. We are once again here. And it is the top of the hour, and so we must do the top of the hour disclaimer. WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign online community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU UCIMC. All right, folks, let's get it started. Okay, so I got a few things for you today. We have an interview at 7:30 p.m. with Comrade Keegan of the Central Region division of the American Party of Labor. Today we will be discussing the question of billionaires, or rather what should be done with them. But first, we have some important climate updates. Yes, it is that time, folks. Okay, so first up on the docket, I've got alligator Alcatraz. I know we've all probably been seeing it. I know I talked about it, I think in my last episode I discussed it a little bit, but we've got some news. We got some news today about that. So, it seems as though a federal judge has paused new construction at Alligator Alcatraz. Let me silence my phone here. I forgot to do that. Oopsie. Hello. All right. The Everglades detention site where the Trump administration aims to incarcerate and deport thousands of undocumented migrants. Judge Kathleen Williams issued a temporary restraining order Thursday barring activities at the site such as paving, filling, excavating, and installing fencing along with new buildings, tents, or industrial-style lighting. Incarcerations at the facility, which can accommodate up to 2,000 inmates, may continue. Williams said the order would remain in effect for 14 days. Okay, those two quotes were from Inside Climate. Now I have something from Reuters here saying that officials have estimated the facility could cost $450 million annually and house some 5,000 people. Now, I'm not a numbers person. I, in fact, do not partake in public math. However, even I can look at this and say, well, I do think that it is really good that a judge temporarily blocked the building of Alligator Alcatraz. I have to say, it's pretty minuscule, all things considered. It's pretty small in comparison to the fact that people are being illegally detained and put in this facility, which with terrible conditions, by the way, because Donald Trump wants to deport them. Which I think that it's good that judges are looking at this and saying, "Oh, this is bad," but a 14-day restraining order to stop the building isn't actually if we're not following that up with further action, if we're not following that up by saying, okay, we need to hold this administration accountable. We need to be out there on the streets protesting this and forcing, if not reaching them with reason and logic, which they don't, obviously, Trump and his whole posse of people are not reasonable or logical, then we're going to have to get out and get loud. And unfortunately, while I do think that something like this, a 14-day restraining order on the building of Alligator Alcatraz does buy us some time, absolutely, we need to be looking at the bigger picture here and saying that undocumented people don't have time. They don't have time for us to say, okay, well, we did it, guys. We got a temporary restraining order for 2 weeks. That's not stopping ICE from going out and grabbing our neighbors. It's not. And so this is one small step in the right direction towards what we really need to be doing, which is holding these institutions accountable and organizing our communities to protect our undocumented comrades, and looking at the situation for what it is, which is we have been bought a small amount of time to support our undocumented comrades, and try to put a further wedge in this building of Alligator Alcatraz, or as I would rather put it, honestly, Alligator Auschwitz, because that's what it is. We in America already have concentration camp conditions in our prisons, and this is no different. This is the same principle. It's no different here, and in fact, we can see that it's the conditions in which the detainees have been put in are absolutely reprehensible. And once again, when I look at a 14-day restraining order, when I look at a 14-day restraining order like this, I see, as I said, okay, this is a step in the right direction. This is where we need to be going, but it's the very beginning here. Okay, because they obviously the Trump administration does not stop for this kind of thing. They're not polite. They're not polite fascists like the Democrats. No, they're just fascists. And this isn't going to stop them ultimately from doing what they want to do, which is mass deportation and ultimately harm to undocumented people. And so, let's see. So it says here from Reuters that it's a relief that the court stepped in to protect the Everglades' sensitive waters, starry skies, and vulnerable creatures from the further harm while we continue our case, said Elise Bennett, an attorney representing the Center for Biological Diversity in the lawsuit, in a statement on Thursday. So yes, how does this relate to climate? I know this is a climate update, and I went off on a little tangent about undocumented people and rights and all that stuff. But there is also a climate aspect to this, which is really important, which is the fact that they are building in the Everglades. Which is, first of all, why? Like, I know that Florida is like a stronghold with Ron DeSanctimonious, but not only is it a terrible place to build, because I believe there has already been problems with flooding. It is also wreaking havoc on, as it says, the biological diversity and the sensitive waters, and the fact that literally like thousands of ecosystems, like so many intricate little ecosystems that live in the Florida Everglades. We are already having a problem with pollution. We're already having, and I'm going to get into that later with the data centers, again, like we're already having these issues. And the fact is that not only is Alligator Alcatraz just like a complete representation of how our rights are actively being stripped from us, as we see the Trump administration going after some of the most vulnerable people, which are undocumented people. But the fact is that they do not care about the environment at all, as we know. And they are building an actual like camp on top of some of our most sacred land, like sacred land for indigenous people. It's very like biodiverse land, which should be preserved for the creatures that live there, because spoiler alert, humans are not the only people that live here. And in fact, if we want to maintain a solid ecosystem, then we have a vested interest in ensuring that lands like the Everglades are maintained for generations to come, so that not only other people can enjoy them, but also so that those like living creatures can also have a home as well. And so this is an extremely important case that we should continue to follow. And this is where I move on to the data centers. This has been, I think I've talked about the data centers almost every episode so far, and we're only on 4. So let's go ahead and see here. So in Tucson, Arizona, the city council has unanimously voted to reject Project Blue, a proposed massive data center campus linked to Amazon. The 7-0 vote came after widespread community organizing against what critics view as a corporate water grab. And that's coming from Democracy Now! And another quote from Democracy Now! Stating, the 290-acre data center would have consumed millions of gallons of water in an area already facing a drought. Tucson's Vice Mayor Lane Santa Cruz spoke ahead of Wednesday night's vote. Lane Ramona Santa Cruz said, hundreds of our families have reached out deeply worried about what this data center could mean for them, for our water, and for our shared future. I've listened to elected officials in other cities who've been left to deal with the aftermath of similar developments, and I've spoken with national experts on AI data infrastructure to understand what's truly driving this push. What I've learned is simple. Giant corporations prefer to operate in the shadows, but Tucson is not for sale. We deserve transparency and accountability. Darn straight. Once again, I cannot swear on air, so I'm gonna use the other versions of these words, which is darn straight. That is what we need to be hearing from elected officials. It's really sad that we're not hearing more statements like this out of elected officials who are literally elected to protect people against things like this. But of course, under capitalism, that's not possible. But we can see here a small glimmer of light from Elaine Ramona Santa Cruz. I'm not familiar with her other track record, so do not quote me on her other legislation and political moves. However, this is a good one, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I would say the first big one is that we can see over and over again how corporations who build these data centers do not care. They do not care. I don't care how many pledges they make, how many different promises they say they'll keep about what they're going to do for the local community, how they're not going to use up a bunch of local resources, how they're going to be good for the economy. And how many times have we seen already on this show how that's not true? We saw the data centers in Memphis absolutely polluting. We saw absolutely polluting black communities in Memphis who have been historically underserved and who are currently trying to fight this environmental racism, which often happens. We can see that development that is going to pollute or just generally not be great to live near is often developed near black and brown communities, and that's not on that's not on accident. That's just not. We can see cases like this in Chicago is a big one. There's a lot of examples in Chicago that I can think of. There's, again, Memphis. There's so many different examples of how environmental racism. I mean, another one, Hurricane Katrina. We can see how, after Hurricane Katrina hit, how the President Bush straight up just, like, what did he do for the black community? Exactly. You know? And of course, I am not a black person, but I can say just from outside observation that when it comes to environmental racism and when it comes to things like these data centers, we need more people, we need more representatives to be a barrier between these polluting markets and the communities that are the most vulnerable, who do not have as many advocates to be able to say, like, hey, this is not good, or who cannot go out and advocate consistently for themselves. Because, spoiler alert, when you're poor, no matter what your background is, it's a lot harder to go out and protest. I mean, from personal experience, I work 2 jobs, and you know, it's enough writing this show and coming in every Wednesday and recording. It's a whole other thing to go out and like literally have your life at stake in some cases with environmental racism, and also having to go out and advocate for yourself, and you don't even know if it's gonna do anything. It takes so long sometimes to be able to get things passed saying, like, yeah, we're gonna protect you. And oftentimes people are not believed. And so I'm really, really happy to see that the mayor of Tucson looked at this situation objectively and said, I'm not giving in to what these corporations are, quote unquote, promising us, which was it was stuff. Again, a lot of these data centers and corporations will say, oh, we'll give back to the communities, we'll do so much, we care so much. And then what do? They go in, they take all their water, they stay there maybe for what, 10, 20 years, and then when the labor base becomes, sometimes this has happened a lot in the past, if the labor base becomes too organized, they leave. If they decide, we just want to move locations, they leave. There's no economic security in this. Absolutely none. And so, once again, this is a great move by Mayor Santa Cruz. And I from Arizona Family, which is a publication in the Tucson area, I believe, they say that the Tucson City Council has voted to reject Project Blue, a proposed 290-acre data center project tied to Amazon, after months of public discussion and debate. I would also like to mention, this just popped into my head about Amazon, they have a terrible track record with workers' rights. We have seen this multiple times when Amazon workers try to unionize. So I think that when it comes to this specific development as well, I'm really happy that they took initiative to reject this wholeheartedly, because as we can see, even if for some reason this was going to be good for the economy by providing jobs and everything, ultimately working people are not like it is notoriously hard to maintain a position at Amazon because they are so brutal to their working people. And so, once again, this is good news. And we should continue to fight, and we should continue to push our legislators, no matter who they are, to reject things like this, to be skeptical of corporations who come in making big promises, realizing that no, they do not care. We have a litany of evidence proving that. And so, moving on to my last environmental story, which is kind of related actually to what I was just talking about with environmental racism. Two federal civil rights cases in Chicago with the Housing and Urban Development part of the Chicago government. Two federal civil cases which had been hailed by activists as important steps towards addressing decades of harm caused by city policies and practices have been dropped by President Donald Trump's housing department. One case centered around a 2018 complaint that aldermanic privilege allows alder people to block affordable housing from being built in white neighborhoods. The other stemmed from a 2020 environmental complaint sparked by a troubled North Side scraper's plan to move its operations to the southeast side, that decades of city policies have pushed polluters into black and brown communities. I had talked about earlier how there have been cases of environmental racism in Chicago, and here we go. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, sorry, not Chicago, the U.S., the federal guys, the big ones, said it will no longer monitor a civil rights agreement with the city that called for the zoning and land use reforms to limit the onslaught of polluting businesses and low-income communities on the south side and west side. That agreement stemmed from a long community fight over the proposed move to General Iron to the southeast side. Former Mayor Lori Lightfoot signed the agreement with HUD, Housing and Urban Development, on her last day in office in 2023, and Mayor Brandon Johnson vowed to uphold it. Those two sources I'm referencing are Chicago Sun-Times and Block Club Chicago. Now, I kind of went into this already, but I think it's important to reiterate. The fact is that black and brown people under racialized capitalism will always be put at more harm and at more risk than white working people. And this is just something that we as white people need to accept and understand. I see a lot of times when we're doing activism, there's a tendency to want to speak for people rather than speak up and give them the platform to then speak for themselves. And when it comes to these things, I highly and strongly urge people to not only seek out my voice on this, but to seek out black and brown voices who are currently doing activist work in Chicago around this issue. I actually did a whole film on this last spring, which released back in June, called Chicago Mutual Aid Story, in which I went around Chicago, and one group that I did not get to interview, but who are just extremely important in the environmental activism community, are the People for Community Relief, I believe is their name, Neighborhood and Community Relief. And if they are not the group that Hazel Johnson founded, it is one related to that. And she was one of the big environmental activists who was one of the first people to actually point out environmental racism happening in Chicago and do activism around that. And I think it is so important when we look at stories like this, when we look at problems like this happening in our big cities, we need to see this from many different perspectives and understand that the people who are currently experiencing this right now, environmental racism, being pushed out of their neighborhoods by gentrification, it is so important to not only do advocacy, but also listen. Listen. Something my mom always taught me is, what is the first rule of helping? And it's always to ask. Ask what you can do. It's very easy, I think, for white activists to come into a space and just kind of start taking over and having our own ideas. And while it's good to take initiative in activism and really, push for better, it's also really important that we don't take over the space and the conversation, especially when it is when it is centered around black and brown issues and the things that black and brown people are dealing with. And I'm not saying this to say that white people can't go in and advocate All I'm saying is that we need to be mindful of how our presence can be harmful. And we need to understand the intricacies of racism in America and understand that ultimately it's not about us. It can be very easy to make something about yourself because these are emotional topics. But understand it's not about us. It's about what they are going through. And that having solidarity means not centering your own story, but centering those who are struggling the most under these circumstances, and hearing people and understanding that, like, there is a time to listen. There's a time to speak and there's a time to listen. And in this case, when I'm talking about housing and urban development, I really strongly urge people to go out and look at Black and brown voices that are talking about this right now and understand that their perspectives are extremely important and should be platformed. Absolutely. And so, yeah, that is our climate section. These last 9 minutes before I get Comrade Keegan on the phone, I'm going to do a little Palestine update because a lot has happened. Now, as a little heads up, I will be out next week, and so I will be uploading a pre-recorded episode with one Comrade Ivana from the Pacific Northwest region of the American Party of Labor, where we will be discussing the genocide in Palestine and all of the intricacies that come with that, and doing some really important conversing. And so, if you want to hear more about that, that will be uploaded next week. But as a little Palestine update, we have Reuters and Democracy Now! From Democracy Now!, Israel's security cabinet has approved plans to take over Gaza City, which would significantly expand Israeli military operations in the Palestinian enclave. Under the plan, Israel will force all Palestinian civilians from Gaza City into displacement camps further south. Meanwhile, the Israeli TV station Channel 13 was reporting that Netanyahu deliberately imposed starvation on Gaza, restricting aid to the besieged enclave as part of a strategy to force Hamas to surrender. Internal government transcripts from March show that Netanyahu repeatedly ignores calls from senior ministers to move to the second phase of the ceasefire agreement to release the Israeli hostages. Now, before I go any further, I just want to say Netanyahu never, ever planned to not starve the people of Gaza. That was always in the cards at this point, because they completely cut off aid on October 9th, or October 9th or 10th, I believe, when after the attacks on October 7th. Netanyahu had always planned to keep this war going, and there's a lot of political reasons for that. But obviously the fallout is the genocide of an entire ethnic group of people, because ultimately what it's about is it's never been about trying to get at Hamas. It was never about Hamas or any of the other groups that have formed in Gaza as a response to the genocide and as a response to the apartheid state. It was always about doing genocide and forcing the people of Gaza out of the Gaza Strip, because it is great real estate and has access to, say it with me now, natural resources. That's right, folks. It always comes back to imperialism. Isn't that so interesting? Isn't that so, I wonder why. Anyway, probably not related, right? Because there also happens to be, and me and Comrade Ivana do discuss this in next week's episode, there is a large natural gas pocket under the sea right next to the Gaza Strip, which Hamas did, I believe, have control over. And there was some look at mining in that area, but ultimately I believe it was abandoned. But again, it is real estate and natural resources which imperial powers want access to. That is why they are pushing the Palestinian people out. That is the reason. It is always comes back to imperialism and good old-fashioned racism, my friends. When we talk about racism, especially here, and not here, but over in the Gaza Strip and in Israel, it is rampant against Muslim people. The amount of Islamophobia that we have seen, the rise in Islamophobia for decades at this point, is not only extremely alarming, but it is also it's also just It's sad. It's truly sad and upsetting to see because, once again, as we can see, hatred like that ultimately manifests in some of the worst crimes against humanity. And the genocide against the Palestinians, I think, stems in large part because of our manufactured consent around Islamophobia. And the fact is that we have been lied to for years about how Muslim people are scary and we need to be scared of Arab people and everything, when in reality, the United States is the imperialist force that has been terrorizing Muslim people, Arab people, people of the Middle East region. It is the United States and Britain and France and all of the other colonial powers which were the problem have continued to be the problem. When we look at situations like what's going on in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, we have to understand that this doesn't just start at October 7th. This goes back years, years and years and years, and it starts always at imperialism and colonialism, because that is what capitalist powers do. Those are their tools. And more colonialism. Imperialism is a policy. And as we can see, what's going on the Gaza Strip, we're getting to that final solution. And it is terrifying to watch and unfold. And I hope and I pray, and I'm not even religious, I hope and I pray that those who may be listening, who may still be on the fence about what's going on and the genocide, please, 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 please look at this situation and tell me that this is not reminiscent of the Holocaust. Because it absolutely is. It absolutely is, and it's happening in front of our eyes, and it's unfolding right now. And it has been an apartheid state for decades now. And it was acceptable because the United States was perfectly fine with it and manufactured our consent around it. I honestly don't know what else I have to say to get people to understand. Because Israel just murdered an entire Al Jazeera crew in the Gaza Strip, stating that one of them was affiliated with Hamas, which there is no credible evidence to back that up. How much longer are people going to be fed this crap before they realize the lies? The lies. It's not like, it's appalling, really. And I wish I could do more comprehensive discussion on this right now, but I just don't know what else to say other than, if you're not against the genocide at this point, then you're for it. If you cannot take a stance right now and say, I am fully against the genocide and what Israel is doing, then I'm sorry, but you're for it at this point. Because that's where we're at. It's completely mask off at this point with everything that's been going on. Completely mask off. There's no way, absolutely there's no excuse for not knowing at this point. There's no excuse for not educating yourself. Are we going to give excuses to the German people who just who just didn't know about the camps? Is that okay? Is it okay that they just quote unquote didn't know? No, it's not. Because a genocide was still happening. And we need to face that. Genocide is still happening. And just because people don't want to accept it doesn't mean that it's not real. And so, after that little rant of mine, we're moving on soon to the next segment with one Comrade Keegan on the question of billionaires. And so, I'm going to go ahead and give our comrade a little call and see. All right. We're going to go ahead and get this started. I'm super excited to talk to Comrade Keegan about on the question of billionaires today, because I think we have a lot to cover. And it's going to be an interesting conversation, first and foremost. And I typed that number in wrong. Go me. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. Apparently I don't know how numbers work. All right, let's go ahead and give him a little ring. Hello?
Hey, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. All right. Sorry, I was just muting the audio because I was listening on the computer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, welcome. You are live here at WRFU 104.5 FM. Hello, comrade.
Hello. How's it going? It is so good to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Yeah, of course. It's so good to have you. For folks, for those who are just tuning in now, this is Comrade Keegan here on the air with me on the discussion of the question of billionaires. Are you excited?
So pumped. It's going to be a good one.
Super pumped. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and do a little intro real quick, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So,
Cool.
this discussion isn't one debating if billionaires should be allowed to exist. This is a statement saying they shouldn't and why. I'm not going to quote statistics on how we could solve world hunger and wars and all of these other issues if we just taxed the rich or just took their money, because we already know these things to be true. There is no reforming the system to force their hands. There is no talking them out of their money. The wealthy elite know exactly where they stand, and they very much plan to stay there. We mustn't allow this to continue. And in this discussion, Comrade Keegan of the American Party of Labor and I parse out this issue, discuss the economic fallout of billionaires existing, how the accumulation of wealth at the top is so consequential, and the common misconceptions surrounding revolutionary principles. All right, Comrade, let's get started. So,
Awesome.
I'm going to start out with a little question for you because I feel like when it comes to economic ideas, especially around Marxist-Leninism, you're much more educated than I am on these. And so, uh, when it comes to like noticeable points of crisis of capital and economic and social turmoil that comrades can identify, which billionaires have either put us in or contributed to us being, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, totally. That's a really great question. And thank you so much for that introduction. It was probably too kind. But what really comes to mind with that question, first and foremost, is that in the last several years, a lot of the political left and actually even certain sections of the political right have come out against billionaires and been sort of use them as the enemy of the people, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
which is obviously, as we're going to talk about, in part correct.
Right.
But one thing that I think we're really going to hit on today, and that I think is going to drive a lot of our conversation, is that billionaires are not the problem. They are a problem that is generated by capitalism over a long enough time period. And that this is really what necessitates what you were just getting at, that there is no policy to reform and simply just change billionaires and make them into nice people all of a sudden. And that capitalism is really at the heart of this issue and is driving the problem.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we'll get to that more, but that's what immediately comes to mind.
Right, right. And it's like the saying, like, there are no ethical billionaires. You can't retain billions and billions of dollars and be an ethical person at that point. Like, especially with all of the social problems we have going on today.
Well, and on top of that too, it's just simply not possible to actually do labor in a capacity that makes you $1 billion. There's no
Right.
way under capitalism which you could actually do real work and make $1 billion. Making $1 billion is something that comes out of owning a massive amount of capital,
Mm-hmm.
and that massive amount of capital is accumulated by exploiting workers. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the first big thing that comes to my mind in recent events would be the 2008 market crash. Is like a big one. It was obviously very consequential. Thousands of people became unemployed, homeless. It was just a huge recession. And when we think about Marxist-Leninist principles and everything, how would you assess the situation? Do you think?
Yeah, so with the 2008 financial crisis, a lot of people were really quick to just blame certain banks and certain individuals in those banks for creating sort of corrupt regulations surrounding those things. And that's not to say that those didn't exist. They absolutely did. But when we look at the 2008 financial crisis, what really happened was capital was dealing with a falling rate of profit where it was finding it more and more difficult to maintain an increasing mass of profit with the current level of exploitation that it was employing. And so it began to utilize financial schemes and things like that to sort of artificially inflate the rate of profit as the productive capacities of capitalism at that time were starting to struggle. And this eventually resulted, and many people don't know this, but actually a lot of the productive sector of the capitalist economy actually began to slow in 2005 and 2006. And then the sort of catch up of the financial gains that they were playing to sort of offset this falling profitability of certain areas of production culminated in the 2008 financial crisis. And I don't want to make that sound like the fine details of the real estate markets and things like that at the time weren't important. They absolutely are. But just from a broader perspective, billionaires essentially were running schemes to help their rates of profit, utilizing the real estate sectors and some of those broken regulations that they had made in order to maintain a rate of profit that eventually they couldn't, resulting in the crisis itself. So, and like most crises, it ended up hurting working people.
Absolutely, and we can see that with candidates like the Obama administration and the Hope and Change slogan, there was a lot of promises, I think, to working people saying that there was going to be retribution and there was going to be change, and that largely did not happen, correct?
Yeah, I believe only one banker was actually ended up getting in any type of legal trouble, and the majority of those banks were bailed out, and to ensure that capitalists could continue to utilize the banks to continue investing and making a profit, all at the expense of working people.
Absolutely, yeah, we can see that time and time again. I think Obama was kind of a unique one because him being, I think, the first black president, there was a lot of change there. I think there was a lot of, as we know, hope that things were going to get better, and they didn't. And I think that it really speaks to the fact that it doesn't matter who necessarily is in the seat. If it's still in the pocket of capitalism, then there's ultimately not going to be a change made.
Yeah, and actually, this is also another really interesting effect of billionaires, which is that as capitalism goes on, so let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
When capitalism is in its early stages of development, the state is obviously set up in a way that primarily serves capitalist interests and primarily serves property in general.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as capitalism goes on and the concentrations of capital move and we start to see billionaires prop up,
mm-hmm.
Or people with the equivalent amounts of wealth, they become so powerful that not only is the state just simply working to maintain their interests at large in sort of a larger theoretical way, there's actually been several studies done. For example, Gillens and Page from 2014, which is by no means a Marxist study, and Gillens and Page are by no means Marxist, but
mm-hmm.
even liberal academics recognize that when this level of economic inequality takes place, the policy preferences and the outcomes of policies directly favor elites and not average citizens. When average citizens and elites disagree on issues, elites win almost every single time in terms of policy that gets put in place by the government. And this is a direct result of the massive amount of authority that billionaires, who are sort of the head representatives of the capitalist class, are able to do due to mm-hmm. the massive amounts of wealth that they have.
Right. Yeah. No, it's really, I think that a lot of people have kind of been like, when we look at, like, for example, media coverage on the financial crash and other such cases where, like, people are being, like, purposely misled, because not only do these billionaires have complete control over the market, but they have complete control over media as well. And so they're able to essentially not only control how the economy rises and falls, of course, but also how, like, what story comes out about it. And I think that ultimately this, of course, leads to a very vicious cycle in which billionaires are able to control every means for organizing, and it becomes much harder. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think that the way in which billionaires, as representatives of the capitalist class, more generally control media is really easy to see in the way that that the media talks about billionaires.
Right.
For example, they do countless puff pieces on different billionaires, whether it be Bill Gates,
Mm-hmm.
Elon Musk, or any of the others, Jeff Bezos, whoever, and they are always talking about how hard they work. There are these pieces that go into their daily schedules and things like that, and they all are attempted to try to make it seem as though billionaires are somehow deserving or somehow uh, have a right to the mass amounts of wealth which they hoard. And I think that this is really a complete lie, and it really hides the fact that surplus value under the capitalist system is extracted from labor, and that
Mm-hmm.
the production process under capitalism and the way in which profit is eventually realized is dependent on the exploitation of working people and the extraction of their surplus value during the production process. And that's something you will never hear on capitalist media. You will never
Oh,
hear
absolutely
that
not.
in a day in the life of a billionaire is how many workers were exploited to ensure this lifestyle. So yeah, the media piece is absolutely crucial towards creating this like mythos about billionaires.
Almost seeing them as gods, almost seeing them as like
Mm-hmm.
I think back specifically to a piece that was done actually on Epstein before, I believe before he got figured out the first time, called The Talented Mr. Epstein, even though there were already rumors spreading around about the things he was doing. um Obviously it's like when you have a certain amount of money that tends to not matter, and puff pieces like you were talking about come out about these people regardless of the way they have treated people, working people, just regular people in life, children, of course. Like, there is so much exploitation that goes around, and they are largely left unchecked. And I think that it's really important, especially when we're talking about, for example, I just was talking about Palestine. There's a whole Track APAC website discussing, who exactly is funded by Israeli lobbies to advocate for the genocide. And we can see that there are a lot of rich people and a lot of billionaires who have a vested interest in ensuring that the narrative around Israel is very molded to being one of benevolence rather than one of bloodthirsty imperialism. And so, like, when it comes to like that situation, I guess, but also just how billionaires can manipulate our elected officials, what would you how would you analyze that, do you think?
Yeah, so obviously, this is similar to what I was saying earlier, where from its very inception, the like modern bourgeois state has always, to some capacity, served the interests of capital, and I think that with the large presence or the large mass of capital which billionaires accumulate,
Mm-hmm.
and again, them being sort of the figureheads or the points of excellence that capitalists aspire to themselves to be, who are not yet billionaires,
Right.
is they're able to sort of utilize their mass amounts of wealth to maintain that their sort of the real way in which they make profit in the production process is not understood
Mm-hmm.
widely, and the real way in which they expand markets and the real reason why they fund certain wars and things like that are obviously obfuscated. I know you were already talking about this. You were talking about the large gas reserves, for example, that are off the coast of Gaza. That's something that, beyond those who listen to this show, which a shout out to you all,
Hello.
is something that is largely ignored by
Unknown,
capitalist
yeah.
media. Oftentimes, it's
And yeah.
something which seems to not even be a factor in the conflict, and there are people who are paying to ensure that that is the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it also speaks to the fact that there comes a certain point in which, while working people who are kept divided by the billionaire capitalist class see borders, billionaires largely don't. They exploit wherever they want, because when capitalism is global and has a global chokehold over working people, capitalists are able to meddle in elections, ensure that, for example, we've seen, a litany of democratically elected, even semi-socialist people in South America, in the Middle East, who have been suspiciously dismantled by right-wing groups, which are not only funded by the U.S., but have ties to billionaires who have a vested interest in ensuring that socialist policies do not get passed in the global South, because that's where their raw materials are. And they don't want to lose access to that. We can see that, I think, in the 1970s when Iran elected a semi-socialist leader who wanted to nationalize Iranian oil, and British oil barons didn't like that. So we can really see how billionaires and capitalists, when it comes to, even if they say, "Oh, I do care about democracy. I love my country, and I want all countries to thrive," they don't. They don't, because when policies like this are going to emancipate the global South out of their like chains under capitalism, all of a sudden now we do have a presence there. All of a sudden, we must be there. What's your read on that? Do you think?
Yeah, and actually, this kind of relates to what we were talking about a little bit earlier in this period, where the state is always set up to serve capital, but becomes more and more an open servant of billionaires as time goes on. And part of the reason that that took place, especially in the post-World War II era, just talking about the United States context, for
Right.
example, of the CIA really being weaponized against different socialist groups and other like left-wing progressive groups around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It comes the reason why the billionaires and the capitalist class as a whole become so invested in and need the government to be increasingly not just in their interest but at their demand, is to prevent a lot of these socialist movements from cropping themselves up. You're pointing to the example of Iran in the 50s. I would also point to Chile in the 70s as well, with the overthrow of Salvador Allende, something which was funded and advocated for by billionaires. And
Absolutely.
now, of course, Allende had issues in himself, but just the fact that they were willing to do that really and this really was one of the early periods in which capital and the state really just served capital's interests so openly and so clearly, to the point of funding death squads in Chile to get rid of Allende. So it's not just an important factor, but the international angle is in part why the state becomes so beholden to particularly certain billionaires, but the immediate demands of the capitalist class as a whole. So it's really important to point to the international context.
Absolutely. And this kind of, I think, perfectly brings us into the concept of, a worker's struggle and workers' organizing, and the fact that it does not see borders, because working people all over the world have a vested interest in fighting for each other. That working people, doesn't matter if you are Cuban, American, if you're German, if you're Palestinian, if you're Lebanese, doesn't matter who you are around the world. You're a working person, and the working people of the world, we need to see that billionaires obviously do not care about these borders, because what they care about is having access to the global South's natural resources and labor to sell in consumer markets. And so I think that there's a lot of common misconceptions around communist uprisings and movements and everything, and I really wanted to hit on this because I kind of wanted to dispel a lot of these rumors about how communists are bloodthirsty, how they just want to do the guillotine and everything. What do you think about that, Comrade?
Yeah, so I think like one good place to start is what separates the interests of true sort of like Marxist-Leninists, true communists who really want to see a fix to this, and perhaps some more either adventurous or other tendencies that border on being problematic, is you'll see, for example, people with the slogans of like "Eat the Rich" or like "Bring back the guillotine" and things like that, and they're mainly just pointing at these billionaires and sort of have this, like you were saying, sort of like bloodlust towards it. And I think what we really kind of explained through this episode, and I think is really key to understanding the solution, is that it's not just that the billionaires are so powerful and need to be brought down a peg through the use of violence or otherwise. What we understand is that the fundamental social relations of society need to be moved away from capitalism in order for the capitalist class, who manifest themselves in billionaires, but also other members of the capitalist class as well, to we need to reorganize the entire mode of production,
right,
rather than just simply take aim at certain billionaires and things like that.
Yeah, they're a symptom.
And to the point of, yeah, exactly. Billionaires are a symptom of the capitalist process on a long enough time frame, and they do a lot of terrible and awful things, but simply just targeting billionaires without targeting the fundamental social relations of production inherent to the capitalist system is a doomed project. So that would be the first thing I'd say. And then
Absolutely.
just more to the point of like bloodthirsty or like the sort of like cult of violence that sometimes gets thrown around, is that communists really understand that violence is not something that we're for. Violence is something that we're working to decrease the amount of violence which occurs in the world. And the only methods which communists use are those which are necessary by what capitalism is inflicting and forcing the proletariat to do.
By material analysis, just looking at the brass tacks of it.
Right. What needs to be done to get these social relations changed? So this is far from being a cult of violence or a sort of like murder cult where we just want to take out billionaires and things like that. This is far from that. This is an understanding that they are a negative symptom of a system which has outlived its usefulness and has to be moved beyond. We have to move towards socialism instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there was a large following around the Luigi Mangione case, for example, and how allegedly he shot healthcare CEO with United Healthcare, Brian Thompson. And I think that cases like that, and I definitely got swept up in this as well. It's very easy to be like, yes, down with the billionaires, down with the millionaires. Ultimately, Brian Thompson was a symptom, and Luigi Mangione allegedly was as well. When we see things like this happening, I think it's very emblematic of material conditions of working people, that even people who allegedly did crimes like this came from good material means. There's still huge gaps and problems in the system which capitalism cannot account for, those being healthcare concerns, living, just basic human needs that are just not being met under the current system. And as you said, it's outlived its usefulness. And so like I would say that something that we can really talk about more when it comes to holding billionaires accountable is, first of all, me personally, as the host of this show, I am against any kind of death penalty, any kind of state-sanctioned violence, because I don't think that there is any justification for that kind of thing. And in fact, I'm more of a proponent for fair trials and workers like looking at the facts of the situation and saying, okay, how can we hold these people accountable without doing the same violence which was done to us? And how would you explain that under Marxist-Leninism?
Yeah. So I think that in general, that when we are talking about sort of holding these people accountable, what really needs to be held into account is that they are currently occupying a social relationship which needs to change.
Absolutely.
That's the fundamental way to hold them accountable, is to get rid of the class system through a change in the social organization, rather than some random punitive measure and things like that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
If we simply focus on, or like, either throwing the current billionaires in a cage and locking it and never opening it up, or something like that, without fundamentally understanding what allowed for billionaires to prop up in the first place, and what the social relationships are that need to change.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that the working class can no longer be exploited by the wage labor system, that we need to move beyond the market, that we need to fundamentally create a new form of government that is not the same and goes beyond the limitations of bourgeois democracy as well.
Absolutely.
These are the types of things which will ultimately hold these people accountable, not a random act of violence or a random act of
Punitive measures.
even nonviolent actions which don't go towards this goal of changing society's social relations.
Absolutely, yeah. I think when I was talking about the trials and everything, it's still very much under this mindset of like, yes, the system which exists is still useful, and it's like that's something that I think like even myself as like a very like I would say a dedicated communist can still fall into, and it's good to like have these back and forth discussions and conversations about like, okay, what is the best measures forward, how do we really do a workers revolution which is benefiting working people, and ensuring that the wage labor system and the system of exploitation is no longer continued. And I really loved your answer there. I think it was a great understanding of like how we can really move past this part of history.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I think that when people are talking about billionaires and talking about the problems of billionaires, this is fundamentally a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's good that people are understanding that this level of inequality is a problem for society and things like that. But when we talk about solutions, we need to go deeper than just this guy has the most amount of money. It needs to
Absolutely.
go to the relationships which allow that to take place. And that's really the perspective that we're concerned with.
The
So,
larger systems, yeah, it's the larger
mhm.
systems. And when I say, for example, on the show when I'm doing a news segment, corporations don't care, they don't care because they don't have to, because the system at its core uh, teaches us and teaches them this is the best course of action. This is what you should do. This is the most acceptable thing to do under capitalism. This is how you become the most successful. And as you said, it's the core of the system itself, and that the symptom of billionaires, while these people should be held accountable for the harm that they have doled out, they are ultimately not the root cause. Um, Again, they are a symptom, and I think that it's really important to reiterate that as we talk about workers solidarity and workers organizing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we could end it on a better note. I think um, that's absolutely it. We understand that billionaires are absolutely to blame for issues like the climate crisis, the erosion of certain political structures and social safety nets, and
Hmm.
things like that. But that again, they themselves are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we need to get done.
Absolutely. It's not necessarily a game of who was the most successful, but who got the luckiest, if anything. Who got the
Hmm.
most access to resources. It's not even a question that someone born in the States to two healthy parents who have good jobs is going to have a better outlook on life, or not outlook, but a better trajectory to be able to be successful and be at their top, than someone who was born into extremely poor material conditions, and that this is completely avoidable, and it doesn't have to be this way.
Yes, a better world is possible. We
It's always
always have to keep
possible.
saying that.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Common, for coming on the show today, and it was so lovely to have you and to talk about this. Where can folks find you, if they can, if they should?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It would be a really huge thanks if you are in the Illinois region to follow the APL Illinois account and just keep track on Instagram, I should say, and just keep following our updates of different organizing events that we're going to be at, as well as different educational events that we're going to be hosting. If you want to know, like for example, a little bit more about some of the economic theory that we're doing, we're currently doing a Capital Volume One reading group. That'd be something that would be really cool to join, and it's online, so it's easy to do. And then just keep up with APL in general. There's
Absolutely.
a lot of exciting things happening around the entire country. So,
Lovely. Thank you so much, Comrade, for coming on the show today. Folks, that was Comrade Keegan with the Central region of the American Party of Labor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, folks, and that brings us to the end of the episode. Another lovely conversation with another lovely comrade. Thank you for tuning in for the hour and listening to the Liberation Hour. Now, I have for you our departing song, a little tune from one Kate Cosentino, a singer who hails from Kansas City, Kansas, and currently lives in Nashville, Tennessee, touring all around. Look her up, find her shows. This is her song, "Throw Myself at the Wall."